I'm from an engineering background, right? And when I worked in support initially at uh, Alcatel-Lucent
Mm.
networking company, and I hated salespeople. Right? I hated salespeople. I fell into sales engineering. I didn't know what it was when I first joined. I learned as we went, and then I realized like if it wasn't for salespeople selling the product that we're working on, every individual who worked on the product wouldn't have a job. And if it wasn't for the people working on the product, salespeople wouldn't have anything to sell either. But no one hates the software designer. Everyone hates the salespeople. So it kind of did a mental shift in my mind. And when I talk to my customers and they start nagging on my salesperson, I tell them, like, you have salespeople too. Right? They work for your company, and that's how you get paid. And sometimes they don't like that, but sometimes it actually pops out, like allows them to think about something. Go ahead.
There's an interesting thing I talk about in my book is we did a live event and we had sold tickets. We had a sales team that was selling these tickets, $5,000 for every seat at this conference. And we had just finished the conference and it ended with a sales pitch. And me and the sales guy the next morning, we're sitting down. We're like, all right, how many leads are you working? He's like, oh man, I got like 20 people. I'm going to WhatsApp them all. I'm going to send him the link to buy. Hopefully we can bring in a couple, like close at least 100,000. It would be a really good month. So I'm going to try to close as much as I can. How about you? Yeah, I got another 40. I just need to send him a mass email as well, see if we can get more leads. How much do you think we can collect? I'm like, man, I think we could get a 250,000. If we could get a 250,000, that would be a good day. And so we're working on this, we're retroing and like we're finding out strategies to maximize the amount of money we can collect. And I tell that story to see like how are people reacting emotionally to hearing two sales guys talking about how they can close as much money, and how different would it be towards thinking about two engineers that are doing, oh, we could do product innovation here and increase the consumption, and we could have people retain themselves on the platform more, and then we could make sure like the emotion is completely different because the aspect of money
Money.
usually comes with a lot of charge.
Money is evil, right? Except we use it to like live, right? Um,
Mm,
and there's nothing wrong, in my humble opinion. There's nothing wrong to for getting paid for a service you're offering other people, especially if it's useful. If it's useless service, then yeah, like don't pay that person. Usually, the market takes care of that, unless it's a scammer.
mhm.
But yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
No,
did
I
you have
mean
a thought?
that's pretty much it. Like I label money within my definition of sales as nothing else than stored energy. I think it's not the greatest evil; it's the greatest invention we've ever had. It's basically we invented batteries for value,
Yeah, yeah,
so we
it's a
could
tool.
store it. We could
Yeah,
store it and then exchange it at a recognized medium for everyone else. So it's fantastic. And when we start demonizing money, I think we start actually holding back ourselves from a lot of the opportunities that could come our way. We hold ourselves back from some of the happiness we can have with having more abundance in our life. And if you resist sales as a byproduct from your resistance around money, I think it's an absolute shame because sale everything that is within our physical reach, like where you live, things you have. If you're listening to this on any kind of device, that was all the product of a sales process that designed everything in your life.
not just that. The individual is a sales product. Like if I want to get a job, I have to sell myself. Right? And if I hate sales, how am I going to do that? How am I going to learn to get better at interviews where I am literally selling myself as the product to the company who's willing to pay for it? So, yeah. And obviously, we love ourselves. Hopefully, people love themselves and they're able to talk about themselves easier. It gets a little iffy when the product sucks and we're trying to sell it, and that gets harder. I wanted to discuss a little bit. You mentioned fear-based versus love-based. I would have imagined it would have been love-based versus hate-based. So I'm curious why the term. Can we dig into the term fear-based? Like, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, because you're right. Most people would assume the opposite of love is hate. But, when you have a very, let's say a customer that is really pissed off, like that's still a good customer. That's someone that had an emotional charge and cared about expressing how important it was for them to have a problem solved. And so I think, you often talk about the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference.
Yeah,
And in my case, when I talk about the opposite of love, it's actually fear. And when you're selling from a place of fear, this is where all the shame or the guilt that comes, the resistance, the procrastination, in sales there's a huge emotional component, and In my book, what I do is I actually define sales as an energy exchange between conscious beings. Okay. And I use the term energy again because I see money as stored energy. Products and service are basically a product of energy. And then you exchange it. There's a flow of energy that happens, right? When you know what you offer is so much more than what you ask in return, that's when the emotion of love actually is what balances the equation. So emotion always happens in every sales transaction. So in simple terms, if it's coming from a place of fear, is that somewhere in this transaction, there's a thought that what you're offering is not more than what you're asking in return. You talked about the shitty product. If you know that when you take $1,000 from a client and you're going to give them a product that's probably going to be, the real value they'll get from that is maybe 500. Oh, you'll feel guilty about selling this. If you had to sell this to a family member, you'd be like, "Mm." And if you're asked to sell that to others, that can be a real um, duality from what you're told to do and what you actually feel. And so that's where the scarcity, the fear comes from. So you might be ashamed of selling it at a subconscious level or conscious level. And then guess what? You'll try to find any distraction to do everything else except do what is necessary to make more sales. Now, if you're within a sales organization, you might have quotas and pressures that kind of build a culture to ignore those little intuitive pulses. But at the same time, that time going to get a coffee, you'll just take your time a little more. Do I call them now? They're probably on break. I'm going to wait. And then nobody's there in the morning. I need to have my coffee first. And you have your coffee, and then you're like, well, it's almost lunchtime. People are probably already out to lunch. So I'm going to call them this afternoon. And you start creating these reasons to procrastinate. But deep down, it's basically because the activity of selling can actually feel painful if you identify that doing sales is a dirty thing. Then you don't want to be a dirty person. So you're going to try to resist this as much as possible. If the product is crap, every sale you make makes you a crap person. So you don't want to face that neither. And then all the beliefs you have around like selling are going to start just putting the brakes on. So as much as you try to watch the motivational talks and you're having quotas and goals, if your foot and your mindset's on the brake to resist sales, you're going to be spinning your wheels. And so what I often tell people is looking at how you're actually having fear around sales. What are those fears? And there's often ones people will think, oh, you're annoying them and you're going to be an annoying salesperson. You hate salesperson yourself. You're not going to be able to get the results. You're going to talk to people who are just going to be annoyed that you call them. Whatever are the fears that come up, sometimes you just need to take a moment to write them down and get clear on like, okay, is that a real fear? And if so, like, what's the worst that could happen? And then from there, start making a plan to say, okay, well, if what could I do to actually minimize the chance of that happening? Or if it does happen, it's not as bad as it needs to be. And so you want to do a lot of fear conquering before you start going from a place of love and selling from that space.